Hey guys, and welcome to Chapter 13. We are in the middle of interactions between governmental branches, and so we're looking at the executive branch today, but more so, we're basically looking at the president today. The rest of the executive branch, we're going to look at when we look at the bureaucracy, which is Chapter 15, and so that's coming up. But right now we're looking at the president. Americans have very high expectations for their presidents who have come from a relatively narrow range of backgrounds. Most presidents are elected directly to that office, but 1 in 5, 20% now, succeeded to the president when the president has died or has resigned. Okay, so modern presidents face a daunting array of expectations from the American public. We expect our presidents to ensure domestic economic growth, to ensure prosperity for everybody. We also expect them to provide protection from internal threats, protection from external threats. As we'll see in this chapter, presidential responsibilities have increased dramatically in the 20th century. But presidential power has not necessarily kept pace, okay? Although we expect much more from our presidents, Americans dislike a concentration of power. As a society, we tend to be anti-government, okay? And at the same time, look to government to solve all of the economic problems, to solve all the social problems. So Americans want their president to succeed, but at the same time, they are critical of the job that the president is doing. Okay, so anybody still want the job? Even you can be president when you grow up, right? Okay, let's go ahead and jump in and start looking at the presidency. So let's start nice and basic. The constitutional requirements to serve as president of the United States are pretty basic. Got to be natural born citizen, not naturalized. Make sure we know that. You have to be born a citizen of the United States. Can't be naturalized, can't go through the process to become a citizen. You have to be born a citizen. You have to be at least 35 years old. Remember, 25 for representatives, 30 for Senate. Now we're up to 35 for president. And you have to have resided in the United States for the last 14 years. Now 14 years is how long you had to have had residency in the United States. It is not how long you had to have been a citizen. Sometimes students mix those two up, so make sure that we're getting those right, okay? Presidents serve for a 4-year term. The 22nd Amendment limits them to 2 terms, okay? This is after FDR went through, got elected 4 different times. 6 presidents have chosen not to run again after their first term, but most tried to run for re-election, and 13 have succeeded. When a vice president becomes president, a new vice president has to be chosen then. So let's say, for example, the president of the United States, maybe we're looking at JFK, maybe we're looking at Abe Lincoln. When that person dies, the vice president becomes president. We all know that. The 25th Amendment now is what's going to stipulate what happens next. The 25th stipulates that the president nominates someone who must be approved by a simple majority in both houses of Congress. So let's say today, for example, what if Donald Trump were to maybe have a stroke or a heart attack or be assassinated? Something happens and he passes, okay? And so Michael Pence is elevated to the presidency. How do we fill that seat? Pence would then select somebody, and then it would be approved by 51% of the House, 51% of the Senate. This amendment also allows for the vice president to become an acting agent if the president is temporarily disabled. So example, if the president is going under anesthesia perhaps, we want somebody in charge. And so the 25 outlines a lot of that stuff. So make sure we know 25th Amendment, make sure we know what's that's saying. 22nd Amendment, also important to the presidency. Make sure we're picking up these amendments as we go through, my friend. Okay, let's talk about impeachment for a second. Impeachment is not the removal of the president. Impeachment is not the removal of the president. Impeachment is not the removal of the president. Let's get that straight right now, folks. Impeachment is the process in which a crime has been suspected by the House of Representatives. Okay, House of Representatives is going to vote to impeach, and then the Senate conducts the trial after the charges have been filed by the House of Representatives. It takes a 2/3 majority of the Senate to oust a president. Presidents can be impeached for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Okay, 2 presidents have been impeached: President Clinton in 1998 and Andrew Johnson in 1868. Neither impeachment would be successful in ousting the president, however, but we have had 2 impeachments. So no president has been kicked out, but we've had 2 impeachments. That should tell you right now, being impeached does not mean being kicked out. Make sure we get that done, okay? Richard Nixon would have been impeached had he not resigned after incriminating evidence was found on tape about the break-in to the Democratic Party headquarters at Watergate. Clinton, his impeachment over his conduct with an intern raised questions over what constitutes an impeachable offense. And that's still hotly debated today, especially with some Democrats and Donald Trump right now. Super simple one that we want to make sure that we know then is Richard Nixon is the only president ever to resign the office of the presidency. Nixon decided to resign rather than face impeachment for his role in the Watergate scandal. A series of illegal wiretaps, break-ins, and cover-ups at the Democratic Party headquarters in Washington, D.C. at the Watergate Hotel. Therefore, it's the Watergate scandal. So Richard Nixon, the only president to resign. Okay, the Constitution gives the president a few national security, legislative, administrative, and judicial powers, okay? Some of these are quite general. The presidential power has increased over time, though through the actions of the president. Power also has increased because of factors including technology, and the increased prominence of the United States on the world stage. The assertion of presidential power has at times created a lot of controversy regarding the constitutional balance of powers. The framers of the Constitution were very intentional about spelling out the detail in Article 1, the powers of the legislature. They wanted to make sure that the legislative branch was more powerful than the executive branch, and is that still the case? It can be debated today. Their fear of a tyrant like the British monarch, from whom they had just fought the battle of the Revolution, made them reluctant to give too much power to the executive branch. James Madison believed that having 3 branches of government, which all shared power and served to check and balance one another, was a way to avoid tyranny. Another safeguard against abuse of power was a short term of office for the president. Remember, he's getting 4 years rather than 6 years like the Senate gets, or life tenure for a federal judge. Article 2 of the U.S. Constitution contains the enumerated powers of the president, the written down powers of the president. Modern presidents infer that they have other powers in addition to these listed here, and these are known as inherent powers. Now, the modern president has power and responsibilities that George Washington could hardly have imagined, okay? He oversees the world's largest and strongest military, the world's largest economy, and a world that is rapidly changing due to technology. Modern presidents have responded to changing needs by taking the initiative to stretch their powers beyond what was originally intended. Although Lincoln expanded the powers of the president during the Civil War, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is considered to be the first modern president due to unprecedented scale of his New Deal legislative programs. His presidential leadership, they required to be enacted by Congress, but they were ruled constitutional by the courts. So FDR is really the one who expands these powers more than anybody else in our history. And so we want to make sure that we know that the New Deal expands that power of the president so much further than the founding fathers could have ever imagined. Now, we like to say they would not have approved of this, but we can't know that because they weren't living in the same times, right? So it's hard to judge this is what they would have wanted. We can only infer those things from what they have written in the Federalist Papers and so forth. So we want to stay clear of that argument and just know that FDR expands the powers of the president. Okay, in the post-World War II era, the era of prosperity in America, 1950s, 1960s, after World War II, and FDR's New Deal, presidential power was viewed positively, and a weak president was seen as a failure. The Vietnam War and Watergate, however, is going to tarnish Americans' view of presidential power. Public trust in government is going to disappear and has never really returned since that era. Although presidential power was feared, Americans simultaneously despised the perceived weaknesses of President Ford and then President Jimmy Carter, who followed him. And many hoped that Reagan would be a strong leader. So he found himself thwarted in his policymaking goals by a divided government, as did his successors, George Herbert Walker, and even into Clinton in the late 90s. Divided government. And so these powers that were these presidential powers that were embraced by the people that came after, just it wasn't able to mesh up, and so we still aren't seeing those super strong presidents that are in our past history. Obama continued many of his predecessors' practices. He also actively used drones to kill terrorists, even American citizens, without trial, and presided over a massive electronic surveillance effort. Things that maybe the Democratic Party isn't going to enjoy, but things that, as president, expanded that power far away from that divided government so that those bills weren't getting passed, but he is still holding onto that power, just as George W. Bush did. So once again, critics charge that the presidential power threatened the constitutional balance of powers. They say, we want you to be a strong president. Maybe you're being too strong of a president. Maybe you're outside the bounds of the Constitution. And the president's going to say, I can't work within the Constitution because you elected a divided government. And so here's what I have to do. And so there's this give and take and this tug of war almost that's going on for every single president, really since Ronald Reagan. One of the president's principal responsibilities is to manage the executive branch. That makes sense, right? He's the top of the pyramid in the executive branch. The vice president has played a central role in recent administrations. Now, cabinet members focus on running executive departments, but they played a very modest role as a unit. The executive office is going to include the Council of Economic Advisors, the National Security Council, which is going to help organize the president's national security, and the Office of Management and Budget, which is going to prepare the budget and evaluate regulations and legislative proposals. This is going to kind of make up a lot of the president's staff. Presidents rely heavily on the White House staff for information. They're going to look for policy opinions, policy options, analysis of things. How much is this going to cost? So if Congress says we need to do this or that and the other, then the president's got to know how much is it going to cost, this, that, and the other. What's it going to do to the economy? How is it really going to impact people? How many people is it going to impact? The president needs to know these things, and so the people around him are going to be able to help him with all that stuff. Now, the First Lady has no official position in the government, but they do play an important part in advocating particular issues and working for the president or with the president. So let's start with the vice president. Vice presidents were often chosen as an afterthought or to placate constituents and balance out the ticket. Vice presidents have performed mainly ceremonial duties until modern times. Okay, when presidents have begun to give them policy, advisory, and advocacy roles. Bush's vice president, Dick Cheney, was considered to have considerable influence over the president's foreign policy, for example. President Obama chose Joseph Biden for his substantial experience in the government, relying on Biden for advice, especially, again, on foreign policy, where a lot of people who run for government are probably a little bit weak. Now, the cabinet is not required of the president by the Constitution, but all presidents since Washington have chosen a select group of advisors in major policy areas. The major cabinet consists of the heads of about 15 federal agencies and major executive departments such as the Department of Agriculture, Education, Labor, Commerce, the Interior. Now, not all department heads are cabinet level. It's up to the president to grant them cabinet level status if he deems their constituency is important enough. Now, modern presidents are no longer likely to convene full cabinet meetings very often, okay? This is just impractical now due to the specialization of each of these department heads. They're going to meet individually with the cabinet members, and they're going to kind of get their advice one-on-one rather than in a group setting. So Washington had 4 members of his cabinet. Today, there are at least 15 that are included in the modern cabinet. So we mentioned earlier that the size of the federal bureaucracy greatly expanded under the New Deal and FDR. In 1939, he established the Executive Office of the President, the EOP, to provide him with staff to help oversee these new programs. The new units of the EOP change depending upon the president's needs, and they have grown to include the National Security Council, the NSC, which advises the president on matters of national security, the Council of Economic Advisors, the CEA, which performs the same role on matters of economic policy, and the powerful Office of Management and Budget, the OMB, which prepares the president's annual budget and advises him on the budgetary implications of each policy that comes before him from Congress. The Executive Office of the Presidency has traditionally been composed of the president's closest advisors. It is overseen by the White House Chief of Staff. President Jefferson had one secretary, and President Wilson typed his own letters even. Today's White House staff, though, numbers at least 600 people, including the president's chief of staff, who acts as kind of a gatekeeper, controlling who the president sees and doesn't see, what information he reads or doesn't read, and his press secretary, who controls the message to the media. Most members of the White House staff are chosen for their loyalty to the president and work anonymously, not receiving any public acknowledgement for their work behind the scenes. The president's closest and most loyal advisors occupy what's known as the West Wing of the White House. Anybody want to guess why it's called that? It's in the west side of the building. It's pretty obvious, right? They're going to work near the Oval Office. How much access and influence they have varies by administration. Some presidents use a hierarchical approach with the chief of staff at the top, who make sure that everyone's doing their jobs. Now, Kennedy and Clinton encouraged their staffs to work together, using a wheel and spokes kind of approach to encourage everybody to participate in the decision making. Whatever the approach, it is the president who sets the tone and must demand the staff analyze decisions and their consequences before offering advice. The White House staff has the responsibility for tasks ranging from communicating the president's message to the people to promoting trade interests abroad. The First Lady has no formal constitutional role. We mentioned that, but many First Ladies have exerted their influence on their husbands and performed duties well beyond just being a kind of a hostess to the White House. Abigail Adams exhorted, that's harder to say than you would think, her husband to consider women in making the nation's laws. Edith Wilson was the most powerful First Lady thus far, as she took over running the country while her husband was incapacitated by a stroke before 25th Amendment. Note the 25th again. Eleanor Roosevelt advocated publicly for policies and charitable causes that she supported. And then we have Hillary Clinton, who was heading the planning committee for health care reform during her husband's administration, as well as serving as an influential advisor to him in other areas. More recently, Michelle Obama has taken up the causes of healthy eating and exercise to combat childhood obesity. So the First Ladies do get involved, even though they do not have a constitutional role in the White House. The president wears many hats, and we talked about that last week in class. One of these is the chief legislator. The veto is a powerful, powerful tool for stopping legislation that the president opposes. The president's role as a party leader is at the core of the president's efforts to assemble a winning legislative coalition behind their president. Okay, presidents cannot do much to increase the number of fellow party members in the legislature in presidential or midterm election years. Moreover, the president frequently faces an opposition majority in Congress. Presidents rarely enjoy electoral mandates for their policies, but they can benefit from high levels of public approval. Circle that. Public approval. A variety of presidential legislative skills ranging from bargaining to setting priorities contribute only marginally to the president's success with Congress. The thing that's going to help more than anything else is public approval. Okay? If the public approves of what the president's doing, Congress better take note, because they better be doing what the president wants them to do, because they need to get reelected too. One of the duties of the president is to inform Congress annually of the State of the Union, a duty he performs usually in a speech called the State of the Union Address. Since this address is now it's televised, the modern president is speaking as much to the public as he is to the Congress about his legislative agenda. Veto power gives the president authority to reject legislation passed by Congress. And often the threat of a veto will persuade Congress to alter their legislation before it even crosses the president's desk. The president's veto is only a qualified negative because it can be overruled by a 2/3 vote of both houses. If a president neither signs nor vetoes a bill in 10 days, it becomes a law. And so a pocket veto occurs when a president does not sign a bill, and before that 10 days is up, Congress adjourns for their session. So those are some things to know about the veto, but we want to get back to that State of the Union address. The State of the Union, he can say, here's what I want you to do, and if you don't do this, I will veto anything else that comes forward. Now, if they don't have 2/3 votes in each house, they better start looking at what can we do to placate the president to make sure that he is signing these bills. Otherwise, Congress is just kind of spinning its wheels in the mud, right? Okay, so that veto power checks the Congress and forces them to do what he wants them to do, or at the very least, forces them to get enough people on their side so that the president cannot do what he wants to do. Presidents have long sought an in-line veto. The line item veto would allow them to strike out individual provisions of a bill without vetoing the whole bill. So they can say, well, the whole thing is good, we just want to take out this line. And so they could strike it out and done. Now in 1996, Congress gave President Clinton this power to do so, but the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional. They said if a bill is passed by both houses, that exact bill has to be what the president signs. He can't change it at the last minute. Whatever the House and the Congress signed, that's what the president has to sign in order for it to be a law. Presidents are also the heads of their party. So presidents depend upon support from their members of their own party in Congress to get legislation passed. It is natural for party members to have similar policy views for the members of the president's party in Congress to want their party to remain in control of the White House and to succeed in implementing the party's policy agenda. It is also natural for members of the other party to resist the president and to vote against bills that he supports based upon an ideological difference, as well as to make him look bad. Okay? As presidents cannot always count on votes from the congressional members of their own party loyalty is not absolute, and parties are decentralized. Members of Congress are first and foremost concerned with re-election, And that means that pleasing their constituents, not the president, is what is most important. Especially, and I underline this, especially if he is unpopular. Again, we go back to what does the public think of this president? And that's what's going to be of concern to everybody, especially the Congress. The president relies on party leaders in Congress to help him gather votes and wheel and deal, offering concessions on some bills in order to gain other bills and get the votes there. Okay, so the book talks about the coattail effect, and we want to talk about this for just a brief second. It has been on the AP test before, so we don't want to just dismiss it here. The phenomenon of presidential coattails occurs when voters cast their ballots for congressional candidates of the president's party because their candidate supports the president. But this is happening less and less in recent elections. So basically what we were saying here is congressmen of the same party of the president ride the president's coattails into office. He's a Republican, and here's a Republican congressman. He kind of, more votes tend to happen for him. He's a Democrat, and here's a Democrat congressman. He gets more votes. He kind of rides those coattails on up to the top. Now, the president's party gains few seats in presidential election years and tends to lose them in midterm elections. So gains a few maybe in presidential election years, but loses them in midterm elections. And we just saw this in the last election when the Democrats retook the House in 2018. Presidents cannot rely on their coattails to carry their party's legislators into office to help pass White House legislation programs, especially in midterm elections. The president's party typically gains few, if any, seats when the president wins election. For instance, the Republicans actually lost seats in both houses when George W. Bush was elected in 2000. Okay, well, regardless of whether his party holds the majority in Congress, the president's legislative influence depends primarily on the public opinion. Once again, the public opinion, his overall popularity. Widespread public support gives the president leeway and weakens resistance to presidential policies. It provides a cover for members of Congress to cast their votes their constituents might otherwise object to. They can defend their votes as support for the president rather than support for a certain policy. They can say, this is what the president wants, and you like the president, therefore I was trying to make you happy, okay? The leverage of popularity has limits. Even an extremely popular president is unlikely to sway members of Congress who have strong ideological objections to his policies. Members of Congress, even on the president's own party, will distance themselves from an unpopular president, even to the point of requesting that he cannot campaign for their reelection. When presidents win office by a relatively wide margin and have high public approval ratings, they often consider that they have a mandate to implement their policy agenda. However, it is easy for a president to overestimate the mandate so that they don't overreach their bounds here and start turning people against him. The first 100 days of a president's term are called the honeymoon period, when presidential approval is typically very high and presidents have the best opportunity to successfully introduce legislation. Now, savvy presidents move quickly to act on their policy agenda during this period. Even during their honeymoon period, a president's political capital is limited to can he lobby effectively for a limited number of policies? This means he must have a clear-cut agenda for legislative priorities from the get-go, from day one. He must also decisively and publicly set the legislative agenda. Otherwise, Congress is going to establish its own priorities and force the president into a defensive stance. Even skilled and popular presidents have limited success with the legislature. The best they can do is exhibit favorable conditions for change, and hopefully the people will be on their side, and that's going to force the Congress to do what they want them to do. Still another hat that the president wears is chief diplomat, commander-in-chief, crisis manager. Presidents have substantial formal and informal powers regarding going to war, and these powers remain controversial. Congress has a central constitutional role in making national security policy, but leadership in this area is centered in the White House. The presidents usually receive the support that they seek from Congress and if they choose to deploy the armed forces. Can you imagine if the president sends troops overseas and then Congress says bring them back, and the president says okay, brings them back, and then sends them right back overseas? What does that make the United States look like? We're very wishy-washy. Do we want to be in this war? Are we really? So if the president sends the troops somewhere, typically Congress does support him, even if they don't really in the end. The president has the exclusive power to recognize the governments of foreign nations by receiving their ambassadors and appointing his own ambassadors to their countries. He can also terminate relations with countries whose governments he considers illegitimate. Another portion of the president's role as chief diplomat, though, involves negotiating treaties, which must be approved by a 2/3 vote of Senate. Senate, treaties. Make sure we know that the Senate is approving treaties, the president is negotiating them. Recent presidents have begun to favor executive agreements rather than treaties, which they fulfill the same function as treaties do, but they don't require the Senate. So we see a loophole for the president here. As the leader of the world's largest economic and military power, the president has distinct advantages in foreign relations, but also a host of competing expectations and obligations that make this delicate and a complicated role. Okay, under his power as commander-in-chief of the armed forces, the president can deploy troops into armed conflict abroad, even though Congress retains the power to officially declare war. Congress must also appropriate funds for military actions, where theoretically provides some constraint on the president's ability to wage undeclared wars. But once again, like we just said, that's not likely to happen. When President Washington was commander-in-chief, he personally led troops to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. Modern presidents often have no military experience and do not take their leadership quite so literally. On the other hand, Washington did not have a standing army of 1.4 million troops at his command, nor did he have the world's largest nuclear arsenal. So there's that too. We just noted that the president can deploy troops even without a declaration of war from Congress. In fact, the last time Congress declared war was after Pearl Harbor in 1941. So since presidents have deployed troops without, we see Vietnam, we see Korea, we see Iraq, we see these other places, we have not had a formal declaration of war. But after the Vietnam War, Congress passed what is known as the War Powers Resolution. Circle this one. This one's important, my friends. The War Powers Resolution. This was over Nixon's veto. Nixon vetoed it, and then the Congress overrode that veto, which makes it a resolution and not an act. So make sure we know the difference between those as well. But let's talk about it a little bit. This law requires the president to seek congressional approval before deploying troops, except in an emergency. In that case, the president must report on his actions to Congress within 48 hours of sending troops somewhere, and in all cases, an engagement within 60 days unless Congress formally declares war. Okay? Presidents generally ignore this law and consider it unconstitutional, but no one has yet dared it to challenge it in the courts, so we don't know. So basically, the president has to, if he sends troops somewhere in this emergency setting, he has to tell Congress within 48 hours. Then Congress has 60 days to support him or to say, bring the troops back home. Again, the president is probably going to ignore this order if he has sent the troops somewhere. Some worry that the rapid response capabilities of modern technology allow the president to bypass congressional opposition, thus undermining the separation of powers. Others say that the commander-in-chief needs the flexibility to meet America's globe responsibilities and combat terrorism without the hindrance of congressional checks and balances. What do you think? I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys have to think. Put it in the comments below. See if we can start a discussion. I dare you. Okay, every president is probably going to deal with a crisis along the way. A crisis is a sudden, unpredictable, and potentially dangerous event. A military attack, an earthquake. How a president handles a crisis makes or breaks his electoral fortunes and his place in history. The discovery of Soviet missiles in Cuba required quick, delicate negotiations on the part of President Kennedy to avoid nuclear war. The terrorist attack on 9/11 necessitated an immediate response from President Bush to deal with the effects after the attack. Early presidents had fewer crises to deal with because word traveled slow, by foot, by horse. Today's presidents, however, have immediate knowledge of what is happening around the globe and must react decisively to a wide range of domestic and also international crises. All right, modern presidents are expected to set foreign policy priorities and the domestic legislative agenda. Since the New Deal, presidents are expected to solve economic problems, keep the economy growing, keep unemployment down, keep inflation down, keep taxes down, and ensure prosperity. They and their party will suffer at the ballot box in a weak economy. It's one of the first predictors of, is a president going to get elected? How's the economy doing? Doing well? Bring them back. Not doing well? Can them. Let's get a new guy in there. Congressional support needs to be on board in order to get bills passed. And the president takes the lead in national security policy in part because the country needs to present a unified image abroad. It must be, it's impractical for 535 members of Congress, 435 in the House, 100 in the Senate, to conduct foreign policy. We need one voice, not 535 voices, okay? So even though the president needs congressional backing, he's the guy out in front on national securities, okay? And so we need to make sure that he is the guy who is the face of the country, whether we like it or not. President Abraham Lincoln said, "Public sentiment is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed." This quote makes it clear that Lincoln and everybody else after him knows that even as early as the mid-19th century, public support is key to presidential success. President Kennedy was the first to use the power of television to speak directly to citizens. Instead of holding traditional press conferences, presidents can appear on television talk shows, address the voters in prime time. We saw President Clinton playing the saxophone on a late night television show. We've seen Obama doing the late night show circuit. All of these things are so different than how we used to get their messages out. Their purpose, though, is clear. Use persuasion to raise public support and shape public opinion in favor of your policies. As chief of state, the president must project a sense of national unity and authority as the country's ceremonial leader. Okay? The framers of the Constitution only partially understood the symbolic and moral building functions a president has to perform. Over time, presidents have become national celebrities. They command media attention just by going out for a jog, by going fishing, by going golfing, by going to church. By these actions, presidents can arouse a sense of humor, a sense of despair, a sense of honor, a sense of dishonor, a sense of just kind of how the American people are judging them by each and every single action. President Bush, he loved golfing, and people said, "Why are you going golfing? Why you should be in the White House? You should be doing something to get the terrorists." And so President Bush stopped golfing. President probably needs to unwind a little bit, right? But he said, "I can't do this because it makes me look bad." Okay, and so President Obama would kind of the things that he would do behind the scenes. He would make sure that he had time for him behind the scenes, where the cameras were not to avoid people saying, "What are you doing? You should be doing this for our country." Okay, and so these things are all highly scrutinized, every single thing that the president does, including just going for a jog. Okay, we seem to be harping on this, so it's gotta be important. Public support of the president. Most presidents seem to be most popular when they first enter office. Later on, their popularity often goes down. Now, Bill Clinton is an exception. He enjoyed higher approval ratings in his second term than in his first. George W. Bush had high approval following 9/11, but public support diminished quickly and steadily after that. Despite the intense efforts made by presidents to court public opinion, it is most difficult for them to sway it. Many Americans are not interested in politics and government, and they pay so little attention to even when the president is speaking on primetime television now. Americans also approach policy issues from a partisan perspective and distort new information to make it consistent with their political references. It is difficult for a president to communicate facts and make them pass through all the filters that people use to process information. Americans often support or oppose policy just based on inaccurate facts. And so this is another big hurdle for the president. He can come on TV and say, we need this and this and this and this, and have the statistics to back it up. And people from the other party are going to say, no way, you're lying to us somewhere along the lines. We don't know where, but we don't trust you. Okay, this is the kind of thing that has come up, and the presidents have this huge hurdle to hop over here based on public support, public approval ratings. Make sure we know the importance of the public's impression of the president. Given our country's origins, it is not surprising that we fear monarchy, we fear dictatorship, and that we have very effectively constitutionally limited the powers of the president and provided checks and balances against his power from the other two branches. Yet Americans are likely to favor a strong president during a crisis, and when the occupant of the White House shares their same ideological opinions and perspectives and pushes policies that they support. When the occupant changes, these same people are suddenly convinced the president has too much power. Does he? Take the example of divided government. It takes the Madisonian checks and balances to an extreme that can cause gridlock. Is this a good thing? Is change possible under a divided government? What do you think? I want to hear from you, my friends. I want to know. Gridlock that comes up from Congress is one party, president's another party. I want to know, is that a good thing? Should we maybe be doing things in a different way so that we can make sure that we're passing these laws, or is it set up in a good way? Tell you what, I want to make sure you're watching these videos. I want to make sure you're answering these questions. I'm going to end this video with some extra credit for you, my friends. If you give me a one paragraph, turn it in when you turn in your quiz on Wednesday. Write me one paragraph and tell me this. Is divided government good for us? Is it okay to have Congress of one party, the president of the other party, and have this gridlock? Should we be supporting compromise? Should we be telling these people, you have to compromise or we're not putting you back in office? What should we do? Is divided government good, or should we maybe be electing people in a different way? Give me one paragraph. I just want your opinion. You tell me that, I'll get you a little bit of that extra credit stuff there, because Lord knows you need it. Lord knows you want it. I got you covered. All right, my friends, I will see you in class tomorrow. I can't wait to see you. It's always fun to see my AP government kids, of course. Maybe not that fourth hour class. I don't have a fourth hour class. It's okay. My friends, us versus the test. Take care of each other. Make sure the other people at your table. Make sure the people at your lunch table. Make sure your friends everywhere in all three classes. We're looking out for them. Are they coming to class? Are they doing the work? Are they doing the best they can? Make sure you stay on them. Make sure you stay on you. Have a great day, my friends. Us versus the test.